Slater Crusaders, glad you're here. Welcome to the show. We got a lot to do. Actually, most of our show today is going to be focused on education-y sort of related stuff. I want to start at Yale with some pretty pathetic news. Yale's history department has removed its big survey course of art history. Vincent Scully was one of the best professors, but certainly art history professors in the world. He taught this course at Yale for 45 years, something ridiculous like that. It was one of Yale's foremost, like everyone's got to take this class, but it's been attacked by progressives because it's too white. Too white, too Western, too straight, and too, what's the last great sin? You have white, Western, straight, and male. By the way, I think I just inadvertently did the white power. Like if someone could, I've never counted my fingers like this ever in my life, but I just did it right there. So that was not a subliminal hint. The course is too white, Western, straight, and male. Those are all the evil things, right? Western, white, straight, male. So we got to get rid of the entire art history course. The last semester, this is the last semester going on now of this class, and I love this line, the new professor will seek to question the idea of Western art itself. So this is all this like, what is art? Like all this crap, right? And this is where you get urinals and gold toilets, and they call it art because who's to say? Who's to say what art is, what art isn't? This new class will consider art in relation to questions of gender, class, race, Western capitalism, and climate change will be a key theme in the art history class. My son Jack, he's a little over 3. He has a kid's encyclopedia. Just bought it the other day from Costco. And one of the books is about art and architecture. So we opened it up the other day, and one of the pages has beautiful buildings throughout history. It's like a timeline of beautiful buildings. And it starts with the pyramids, and then there's Notre Dame and the Colosseum, right? Just like the most beautiful, look at that, most beautiful buildings in history. And then it ends with these 2 entries, okay? This is the last, so it goes through history timeline, and the second to last one is this building, La Centre Pompidou. That is the single ugliest building ever conceived by man, built in the 70s, all right? Look at that thing. That thing is a travesty. How can that be real? Put it back up. Put the thing back up. It makes me so mad. Who would sign off to that? Who would build that thing? Who would sign off to that? Who would be a part of the construction of that? It looks like an old oil platform. There's a library inside, museum, stuff like that. So just compare that with the New York City Public Library, just to get a little comparison. Okay, so that's what we're talking about. I'd laugh because I'd cry. So this book, the last 2 entries, you have that building, La Centre Pompidou, and then you have a piece of public art, which is weird because it's not even a building. So this is in Chicago. It's called the Crown Fountain. So it's this, I think it's pretty tall. I think it's like 40 or 50 feet. And it's a video of people, and it changes, right, every couple seconds, but it's a person spitting water, and then actual water comes out of the hose. And that's like our great modern thing we do. This is the best. This is the best we got. This is what the people at the Smithsonian decided to throw in their little encyclopedia for kids. So we go from like the Taj Mahal, which is not a Western building, but we go from the Taj Mahal to the Centre Pompidou. We go to this garbage. That thing. Like that's such a. I just want to be clear. Like there's a lot of ugly buildings that are built all the time, but that one's held up and heralded as like one of the most beautiful. And like the pinnacle example of modern architecture. And to the point where it has to be included in the book of great buildings. What are we talking about? This is progress? This is progress? But according to the new professor at the Yale course, putting European art on a pedestal is problematic, which is the progressive word for this. This is Jay Nordlinger. He said, madness. This is another example of how a great civilization commits suicide. May there be a revival, a return to sanity and appreciation. Now, here's the key line here. The next tweet he says, frankly, this Yale story may be the most important news of the month. Despite impeachment, war and peace, everything else, Important for the long term, I mean. In a sense, this is the ball game. Whether our civilization is worth defending and appreciating or not. I love that line. This is the ball game. Whether our civilization is worth defending and appreciating or not. So my brother sent me this story from the Yale Daily News there. And I told him I have to do these alumni, I don't have to. I signed up to do these alumni interviews for kids who are applying to Yale. And you just meet with them at Starbucks or whatever, and you talk to them for a little bit, make sure they're a functioning person. And I stopped doing it. I can't do these anymore because it was just everything I could to not sit there and say, you shouldn't go. Right? I get this poor high school junior or high school senior, and they're like so excited to sign. They really want to go, and they're all nervous because they like think I have like a real say in this thing. And I just want to be like, no, you really shouldn't. I really want you to think this through. Save your money. And by your money, I mean $250,000. It's like 70 grand. So save your money. All of the courses are free online. What's the point? Read some books. You'll be fine. But my brother's point was that all it takes is one generation, and Yale could take its untouchable reputation of one of the best schools in the country and just throw it away. It's just gone. Just boom, like that. We talked before about this Yale mathematician. His name is David Galertner. And he wrote the other day, I forget what it was about specifically, but he said, if Yale were a serious academic institution, and then he went on and said what they should do. But I thought, whoa, if Yale were a serious academic institution, implying that it's not? And he's right. Yale is not a serious academic institution. Either is Harvard, Princeton, these Ivies, they're not. And that's the point of the art history class. If we don't understand the art of our cultural past, then we're jumping off the shoulders of the giants who we're supposed to be standing on. And then what? Start from scratch again? Dr. Stanley Kurtz, in defense of Western civilization, he had a great line. He said, liberty in the bones is lost when the story of the West is forgotten. And the story of the West is being actively attacked. Reagan's most famous speech, right? The time for choosing speech. He said, freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We didn't pass it to our children in the bloodstream. It must be fought for, protected, and handed on for them to do the same, or we will one day spend our sunset years telling our children and our children's children what it was like once in the United States when men were free, and what it was like to live in areas that didn't have buildings like the Centre Pompidou. But Yale's just throwing it away. You don't pass appreciation for art and for our cultural past through the bloodstream. It has to be taught. And Yale threw it away because it's too white. We're going to talk a lot more in the future about art and architecture. I believe our culture's rotting from within. And it's hard to show. It's hard to show and point to cultural rot, right? So we talk a lot about the breakdown of the family, but you can't really point to it, right? Yesterday we did a segment about personal responsibility with Elizabeth Warren and student loan debt and stuff. And we can share the story and all that, but you can't point to lack of personal responsibility, really. It's not like a thing. But you can point to an ugly building. And I believe that architecture is the visual representation of ideas, right? So our culture, our Western white straight culture, produced the Pieta, Michelangelo's Pieta, right? So our culture produced this beautiful, stunning work of art. If you ever see this thing in real life, it's ridiculous. Like, how did he carve fabric out of marble? And there's a point there where like Mary's hand is on Jesus' thigh, and you can see like the indent in his leg. And it's like, what are you talking about? How is that thing possible? So we go from that to this. Come on, you can't tell me that that's progress. And you also can't tell me that that isn't the representation of our culture. It took a lot of work to get to Michelangelo's Pieta. It took a lot of work to get there. It took no time to throw it all away to get to Cy Twombly's Untitled. That's what that piece is. Cy Twombly is the artiste, and it's called Untitled. Couldn't even come up with a name for the darn thing. So Jack, bring up my kid again. He wants a bicycle, and we're making him earn it. So he has to get 50 stars. He has to earn 50 stars. Now, I hate stars. I don't like giving stars or awards to kids for doing things that they're supposed to do. So I'm very anti-stars. But we came up with a system where Jack gets a star if he does something without us telling him to do it, right? So if he gives a toy to his sister, or if he cleans his room without us telling him, he gets a star. He got 11 stars the other day. He got his 11th star. Woke up from his nap, we went in, he cleaned his room. Beautiful. Cleaned his room, he gets 11 stars. Great, we gave him a star, big celebration. It was great. 20 minutes later, he disobeyed mommy. Lost a star. Took it right off the paper. Gone, star gone. And Jack learned a valuable lesson that day. It's difficult to earn a star. It requires effort, foresight. You have to do something you don't want to do in the moment, so there's delayed gratification. Earning stars is hard. And it's very easy to have one taken away. Jack, come here. He doesn't. Boom, done, star gone. Just like that. Oh, but I worked so hard for that star. Gone like that. And that's life, Jack. That's one reason why we called him Jack, so I could say stuff like that. That's the way it goes, Jack. It's life. It's life with money, right? Hard to earn, hard to earn. So easy to waste. So easy to waste. You can buy it, or you can just take a wad of cash that it was hard to earn, you just throw it in it's gone. Money's gone. It's true reputation. Hard to earn a good reputation. Man, is it easy to lose. It's true with righteousness. Hard to keep, easy to throw away. It's true for our country. Hard earned. Easy to throw away. Or in this case, easy to let other people attack it and throw it away. So listen, you may scoff at this story. You know, art history is not a big deal. But it's not about that. It's a sign, another sign of our cultural rot. Progressives will attack everything in our culture and in our past. Marriage just comes to mind, but so many other things. They'll attack it all until there's nothing left. And Ben Franklin was right. We have a republic if you can keep it. True story. Mike Slater. We have a guest coming up next who's going to speak more on this, more eloquently than I can. Mike Slater, spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders, glad you're here. Really excited for our next guest, Mr. David Randall. He is from the National Association of Scholars. Mr. Randall, how are you, sir?
I'm fine, thank you. How are you?
Wonderful. Can you give us a brief intro in the National Association of Scholars? What's your guys' mission? What are you up to?
So, we are dedicated to restoring higher education to be a place that is dedicated to the pursuit of truth. We're also interested in depoliticizing it and making sure that it continues the long conversation of Western civilization.
Oh, wow. So we kicked off the show talking about Yale's art history class getting removed. I didn't tell you we were going to talk about that, but I mean, do you have any initial thoughts on that happening?
That it's terribly sad and unfortunately happening everywhere in the country. Every traditional basic skeleton of knowledge is being disassembled, sacrificed to the altar of identity politics.
Why does it matter? Because I'm thinking back, well, when I took art history in college and thought, this is stupid, this doesn't matter, who cares, art history, whatever. What's the effect that losing this has for our culture moving forward?
Everyone should read a book by Victoria Coates, who is, among other things, the National Security Advisor Council now. She used to work for Ted Cruz, called, I believe, David's Sling. It's a history of Western art as the expression of liberty through the centuries, from ancient Greece to the Renaissance, that Michelangelo's David expresses Florence's love of the Republic and liberty. When we lose art history, in addition to losing the beauty of itself, and the 2,000 years of people learning how to make new beauty, we also lose the history of art made visual for us to see.
That's so good.
Visual.
Say that one more time, sorry.
Sorry, the history of liberty made visual for us to see.
Oh, that's so good. Okay, so if we don't, so I want to talk about beauty. We're going in a totally different direction, but you're smart, you can do this. Beauty. Why does beauty matter? I think I have this working theory that everything around us is increasingly ugly. Art, pretty obviously, architecture, music, everything's getting uglier. What are your thoughts on that?
Here's something from the 18th century philosophy of aesthetics, David Hume, Immanuel Kant. We use the ability to make judgments about art to learn how to make judgments about morality. When we can't even say what's beautiful, we don't know how to say what's good. Disassembling art makes it impossible for us to make moral judgments.
Oh, wow. That is so good. Which comes first? The beautiful art or the beautiful morality? And then therefore, which falls first?
Okay, and here would be where the philosophers start to argue. I would say that what comes first is teaching people that there is such a thing as beauty out there and that they ought to try to judge it. We don't need to worry yet whether it comes first from us or out there, but if we don't even try, we'll never see it.
Oh, that's so good.
That should be happening in college.
David, I'm so glad we're talking. You are putting such beautiful articulation to these things that I haven't been able to in so long. This is so fantastic. Okay, I want to introduce to everyone this piece you wrote about, I guess it was a year ago, right? No, not even, a couple months ago.
Yeah, December.
Yeah, apologies. Social justice, I'm still getting used to 2020. When I saw 2019 here, I was like, social justice education in America. How do progressives define social justice? Because it sounds very benign. And how should we define and look at social justice?
The radical definition of social justice education, social justice, is what's operative on campus. What is the definition there is that, that to achieve social justice, we need to have a political alliance of different identity groups defined by race, sex, sexual orientation, etc., who are all working to achieve social justice, which is defined as good things being given according to a sort of an arbitrary definition of who deserves them. The corollary is that everything needs to be dedicated to the pursuit of social justice, and unfortunately, that means all of education as well. The purpose of everything from a mathematics class to a writing class to an astronomy class to a zoology class all needs to be dedicated to social justice.
Is social justice, is it a set of policy beliefs or is it even bigger than that?
It practically works out to a series of policy beliefs for which, the Green New Deal, which came out, is a reasonable shorthand of what is the current social justice policy. The broader thing is that we are defined by our identity groups we deserve good things in life because of which identity group we belong to. There is no sense of equality of opportunity. There's no sense that we should be thought of as individuals or as citizens of a republic. Yeah, and that is, and when I should say, and there is no sense that there is any legitimate opposition to social justice. That's part of it. That any opposition is illegitimate and deserves to be shouted down, censored, driven from the public square.
Yeah, and that's why it's taken over so rapidly. Can you give us one example, maybe your favorite? And you have this beautiful long article about all this with many, but can you think of one example, one blatant example of social justice taking over our universities, and then therefore the consequences that will have for all of us moving forward?
There are so many different things. I guess I would say the eradication of any memory that you shouldn't be partisan. The civic engagement wing is often very thinly disguised support for progressive causes. But you had, I believe, was the University of Southern Maine, for credit, going down to protest Brett Kavanaugh at his nomination. That the teacher and the administrators no longer remembered that you shouldn't be having political activism for course credit. This is where it's headed, and this is what will happen as the people in charge forget that they're even supposed to pretend to be nonpartisan.
This reminded me of something that I've recently heard about and I'm still thinking about, and I'm sure you have, presentism, right? So the idea that you should be in a university and protesting a Supreme Court nominee as opposed to learning about things of the past seems, to use their term, problematic. What do you think about that idea of presentism that is part of progressivism?
And I guess I would say this is part of what political engagement, that they think the highest form, they think that character development means to be politically engaged. And they have no sense that part of character development is precisely what you do when you're disengaged. When you are studying something because you love it for its own sake, when you are studying anything for your private life and enjoyment. And there's no sense that the Republic is made up of people pursuing their own private joys and satisfactions, and that this is what the Republic is for.
So good. Can you, so to bring it back around, I guess, to the Yale class, what would you say to the progressives who say, these are dire times and we need to be politically engaged, otherwise, whatever. Global warming is going to kill us, or Brett Kavanaugh is going to, whatever. And to the progressives and the social justice warriors who say, we have to get rid of that course, that history course, because it's too white, it's too Western, it's too male, it's too straight. You're not getting it, David. These things are urgent.
I was just reading a young adult novel set in Ravensbrück concentration camp, I think Rose Under Fire. It mentions what is true, that Polish female prisoners who had been experimented on by the Nazis spent their time trying to educate one another to learn what they should have learned in university but couldn't because they were prisoners. Women in a concentration camp thought that they should spend time learning about literature, astronomy, poetry. I think they know what are our proper priorities.
Oh, so good. David, we didn't even get to the main thing we needed to talk about, but I feel like everything we talked about here is of way more timely importance, eternal importance. I'm super grateful, and I really hope we can talk again. Where should we go to learn more about you and about the National Association of Scholars?
Well, our web address is www.nas.org. You can follow to a long series of research reports we've done on all sorts of topics, Confucius Institutes, College Board, The Lost History of Western Civilization just came out. And you can find me, I suppose, I'm listed on the staff and boards, but our reports matter more.
Okay, beautiful. David Randall. David, thank you so much, sir. We'll talk again.
And thank you.
Thank you. Just wonderful. I love when we can ask a question and out of nowhere, he's like, oh, well, David Hume said. Beautiful. True story, Mike Slater. Spread the word. Slater Crusaders, welcome back. Going to keep this theme of education alive today. I want to go to Max Eden, a senior fellow at the Manhattan Institute. Mr. Eden, how are you, sir?
Doing very well. How are you doing?
I should also say author of Why Meadow Died, the people and policies that created the Parkland shooter and endangered America's students. Gosh, there's a lot there. If we have a minute, I want to talk about that. Otherwise, I hope we can come back again and we can talk more. But I want to talk about charter schools. Mm-hmm. I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, but charter schools are probably the biggest issue or biggest policy in our country where the people clearly, overwhelmingly want one thing, and our politicians just will not let people have it. Yet those people still vote for those same politicians. It makes no sense to me at all. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I mean, certainly on one side of the aisle, right? It's this odd issue where kind of the Republicans have an ideology that supports it, but not many constituents that do, whereas the Democrats have many constituents that support it, and an ideology that opposes it. When you look at the polling, it's something like 58% of Black Democratic primary voters support charter schools, 52% of Hispanic Democrat primary voters support charter schools, and yet almost to a man, right, with the exception of Cory Booker, who was for them before he retreated from being for them, before he retreated from his retreat of being for them. Aside from Mike Bloomberg now, you can't find a Democrat who doesn't actively oppose them. So it's a, maybe the clearest cut case of a political party holding a position that is not only directly counter to the stated preferences of its constituents, but demonstrably counter to their interests. There are a lot of public policy issues that I think are more open-ended, more open to debate, but the benefits of charter schools for Black and Hispanic low-income students in urban settings, that's not really disputable. It's kind of that's when you're getting into denying science territory.
Yeah, well, let's do that for a minute, right? Give us a couple minutes here of what you guys found in your report. 20 charter schools boost results for disadvantaged students and everyone else. What did you find? Give me some data.
Yeah, so I mean, there have been a series of studies by this kind of sub-think tank out of Stanford called the Credo organization, and they've looked at charter school performance comparing charter students to traditional public school peers that are similar to them. And they find, for example, that when it comes to urban Black students, charter schools kind of provide the equivalent of an additional 59 days of reading instruction per year and 44 days of math instruction per year. When it comes to Hispanic English language learners, charter schools provide the equivalent of an additional 79 days of reading instruction per year, an additional 52 days of math instruction per year. So, if you're in a charter school, the quality education you're getting in these urban settings is sufficient to if you were in school almost all of year. This has been, studied outside of the Stanford study. Many academics have tried to do these randomized controlled trial studies, right? So you look at students who apply to charters and get in, students who apply who don't. From this that it's causal, right? There's no differences between the students. The effect that you're seeing is from the charter schools. Of 15 studies reviewed by some economists, 13 found substantial positive effects and 3 found negative effects. There's basically no empirical argument that shows that on net charter schools hurt the students who attend them. Sometimes charters are accused of hurting traditional public schools, right? I mean, they take money away from public schools. They hurt public schools as though, the school itself is the unit that we should be concerned about rather than the student. The thing is, it's both true and false, right? I mean, charters do take money away from traditional public schools. The money will follow a student from a public school to a charter school. In many cases, that leaves the traditional school district worse off. They have less money. They have to scrounge out a little bit, budget crunch. You would expect that to harm academics, right? There are kind of more studies that have been coming forward lately showing that cuts to school budgets do have negative effects on student performance. But despite that, study after study after study in about 6 states have found positive effects for traditional public schools from charter school entry. And the theory behind this is that it induces competition. Charter school opens up, the public school knows that it has to do better to keep their students. And so despite the crunch to their budget, the kind of organizational shift induced by competition produces, not dramatic, but statistically significant benefits in almost every case that's been studied.
Makes perfect sense. Let me play devil's advocate.
Sure.
One would say, sure, Max, but the reason why the kids at charter schools do better is because they have more parental engagement, because a parent needed to even try to get into the charter school in the first place, which proves that they're more engaged, and therefore that's why the student does better. What do you say to that?
Yeah, there are 2 things to say to that. One is, I kind of mentioned 2 spheres of studies earlier. The study that I gave the learning date gains from, and the studies that I just gave the kind of count overview from. The first set of studies I described are open to that critique, right? They don't necessarily compare apples to apples. So they sometimes compare students who applied to students who didn't. The second set of studies, though, looks only at students who applied and got in versus students who applied and didn't. So it's studying within the universe of motivated parents and finding that within that universe, where we should assume no student differences, we still see benefits. The other response to that from less of empirical and more philosophical perspective is, okay, so what's wrong with that? Their parents are more motivated. Their parents send them to a school and they do better there than they would have done at a traditional school. There is one mindset, the kind of increasing focus on equity that you hear about, that holds that anything that contributes to disparate outcomes is inherently suspect, even if that means we should keep kids down. But I think that if there are some more motivated parents in communities, they want to send their kids to a better school, their kids will do better in those schools than they would do otherwise. That's something to be celebrated. Those parents should have the same opportunity to find a kind of education that ambitious parents want for high-striving kids that they would have if they had greater economic means.
Yeah, you'd think this argument would lead politicians to say we need more charter schools, as opposed to what they're doing, which is shutting them all down, and giving no parents that choice and no kids that freedom. I don't want to waste time because I just real quick though, do you believe also the reason why politicians don't allow this is to protect the unions, right? They don't like charter schools because usually the charters aren't unionized and they're really all in it for the unions. Is that the case?
Yeah, I think that's most of it, and that's been the case for a while, right? I mean, charters are a threat to union hegemony because they show that you can do better with these kids, and they show that these kids do better frequently in settings that aren't unionized. So it is a profound political and philosophical threat. That's always been there, though. I think what's new in the opposition, and I'm not sure I could quite explain it because I can't always follow the contortions myself, is that the rise of kind of woke intersectionalism, which is an ideology that's very much kind of in the hands of privileged opinion brokers on the left, right, has made this into a kind of a right-wing, neoliberal, exploitative, segregative conspiracy theory. And somehow, we've gotten to the point where parents of color freely choosing schools that they believe to be better for their kids might be resegregation, right? Or, teachers of color, communities kind of opening up schools for themselves with minimal backing from outside organizations constitutes corporatization. And so what's interesting is that you've seen the big shift within the Democrat Party on this. It hasn't come from blacks, hasn't come from Hispanics, it's come from whites who have very rarely a direct stake in this issue, but they've turned dramatically against it at the same time that they're protesting, more loudly than ever, that their primary political mission is the betterment of historically marginalized communities. So it's this kind of perverse inversion that has taken place kind of through, woke ideology in the hands of an interest group that feels threatened by it.
So well said. I wanted to ask you about the rhetoric. So you mentioned corporatization. That's a scary word that's used. I also hear Elizabeth Warren talk about privatization of education for all of our kids. Why do these terms scare people? What's the goal here?
Yeah, I mean, they scare people because they're worried about people like making money off of students. And these concerns aren't always entirely groundless, right? I mean, there have been bad actors in the charter school sector, sometimes especially among the online schools, that find a business model, draw kids in, take the money from them, don't offer an education. It's a pretty small share of the overall sector. So very frequently you will hear them say, well, I'm against for-profit charters. I'm against for-profit charter management organizations. Those are largely online charter schools, which have their problems and also have their virtues, but become a kind of nice middle ground boogeyman for them to be able to both oppose charters rhetorically while also, insisting, oh, no, I'm not going to take away your school. I'm not going to destroy your school. I just don't want these bad guys profiting from your kids. So it's a kind of a rhetorical trope that, allows them to pretend to their constituents that the implications of their proposals aren't going to be what they're going to be.
And it's also said as if the current public schools are so virtuous and perfect and wonderful, and have no blemish.
The massive, there's untold corruption within public schools, and there's bad actors are very rarely called out within them. And so it's a compared to what question, right? Like, you can find instances of waste, fraud, and abuse in charter schools. They sound bad. What's the counterfactual, right? I mean, just one quick example, maybe the segues to talk about the book. I mean, in Broward County, they raised $800 million on a school safety bond. They've recently announced they're going to go about $600 million over. And this is in a school district that had previously had three grand jury investigations for allegations of corruption and bribery stemming from contracting. So you hear one story about a charter school that's, has a management structure, kicks back a contract to somebody who is on its board. It's not good. Maybe there's $500,000 that are fraud that the taxpayers are defrauded from, compared to $500 million by a major school district, or one that people just happen to be paying attention to contingently.
We here in San Diego Unified, the head of the school board is also the head of the unions. How about that? Like, how is that even legal? Is that the head of the school board is the head of the unions? This is a good segue, Max, and we only got about a minute or two, so hopefully you can come on again and we can talk in more detail. But tell us the premise of the book, Why Meadow Died.
Yeah, after the Parkland shooting, almost the entire conversation focused on gun control, right? I mean, one group of students came forward and they said very strongly, we blame the gun, we blame the NRA, we blame, kind of Republicans for what happened. Another group of students came forward and they got a lot less attention after the first week. They said, we knew he was going to do this. We knew it was him before it was over. He brought bullets to school, he brought knives to school. He threatened to kill us. He threatened to rape our friends. We saw something, we said something, and they did nothing. And I was curious to know why that happened, because this is a school district that had become famous for its leniency policies, famous for its initiative to lower arrests, lower suspensions, lower expulsions. And my hypothesis going in is, did these policies that were intended to reduce reporting play a role in the students slipping through the cracks? And the full story is longer and sicker than we have a minute for, but the thesis of the book is that if one individual in the Broward County School District made one responsible decision about the shooter, then it could have been avoided. But you can't call what happened with him a failure, because every obviously morally wrong decision made about him actually makes perfect sense given the policy incentives that the administrators were facing.
Yeah.
Cover it up and then hold yourself for it, because what's the worst that can happen? And even if the absolute worst happens, you can blame the gun, face no consequences locally or nationally, no reflection on what's happened inside the schoolhouse, and wait for the next one to happen.
It's amazing that we can all be so manipulated into this. Like, this is the problem. And everyone just rolls with that, right? Everyone goes with it. And I'm so grateful you come up and you're like, no, hold on. Hold on. This is where we need to be focused, more on the truth.
Yeah, just
really
look
good.
at what happened. Just like look at the facts. Where do the facts lead? You can have your gun control debate too. It shouldn't be a one or the other. But we argue it was the most avoidable mass murder in American history, and I'll stand by that any day of the week.
Wow. So the book is Why Meadow Died, The People and Policies That Created the Parkland Shooter and Endangered America's Students. Let's definitely talk more about that book next time, and check out the Manhattan Institute about the charter school studies. Max Eden, good to talk to you, sir. Appreciate you.
You too. Thank you.
We'll wrap all this up next. True story, Mike Slater, spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders. This story popped in my brain when we're having these conversations here. I think this is the ultimate metaphor for progressive ideology tearing down our past, tearing down wisdom, and to quote our guest earlier from the National Association of Scholars, tearing down truth. And this is just the perfect metaphor for it. So a couple of years ago, Rachel Maddow was walking in an auditorium in Harvard Medical School. And she looked up and she said, "What's up with the dude wall?" There's a wall covered with portraits of scientists from the university, from Harvard University Med School, who have won either the Nobel Prize or the Lasker Award. Lasker Award is a prestigious award for in medicine. And it was all men. 30 paintings, 30 men. And a female, so is Rachel Maddow. What's up with the dude wall? All right. So there's a female neurobiologist who was there who said that the wall is imposing. And I think every institution needs to ask, what kind of message are we sending? It sends the message every day when you walk by it that science consists of only old white men. Man, you are I don't want this to sound rude. You are a sick person. And I mean that like you're infected. You're infected with a disease of your mind. If you see a wall of portraits of amazing scientists who have achieved amazing things, advancements in medicine, who have saved countless lives through their research, and all you see is white men, right? That's what you see when you see that wall. And you, of all people, you're a neurobiologist. You know those people out there. I don't even know them, but I can assume like they must have done impressive things, and I can kind of make things up. You know those men. You can know what they did. Makes sense to you. And you still just see white man? Man, if that's you, your mind and your heart is infected with it's progressive secularism and victimhood. Just progressivism. How you can't look at that wall and see the achievements of these men and instead think, I'm gonna work hard so that one day my picture will be up on that wall. That's not you. Instead, it's, no, tear them all down. We gotta take them down. It's so imposing, which is like a weird thing too. It's like, I am woman, hear me roar. Oh, it's imposing, right? That doesn't make, like, I'm a feminist, I'm strong, I'm a strong woman. Oh, but I can't bear to look at the wall of men. Protect me. So schools are doing that, including Harvard Medical School. And only one person publicly argued against it. This is the former dean of the Harvard Med School. He took a picture of the wall now. He says, when I last lectured in this auditorium, the walls were adorned with portraits of prior luminaries of medicine and surgery, connecting us to a glorious past. Now it's all gone. I hope everyone's happy. I'm not. And neither were those I asked, but they were afraid to say openly. Sad. But isn't that just like the segment was the opening segment, right? We went from Notre Dame to La Centre Pompidou, right? It's the same degeneration, it's the same rot. And to go from that wall with the portraits on it to the empty wall and to call that progress, you see the metaphor, right? But it's everywhere. Statues, murals. Remember the story, and it was in San Francisco, George Washington High School. There's these beautiful murals of George Washington, all these other things, and we had to take that down. We had to paint over that at the cost of like $2 million or something, which doesn't make any sense. They go to Home Depot for $50, buy enough paint to cover up the mural, but it costs like $250,000 for the school district in San Francisco. But the Betsy Ross flag, like it's all over the place. So what the heck is going on here? This is Rod Dreher. I like Rod a lot. He's a thoughtful guy. He said the kind of people who remove photographs of medical institutions past greats, because those greats are white men, are making a fundamentally religious decision. They're purifying the temple. The problem is the temple of the world can never be fully purified. It will not stop with the photographs removed. The cycle of purgation and purification will continue until they have built utopia, which of course is an impossible goal. This pseudo-religious madness will not be stopped until those who recognize for what it is, you and me, put a stop to it. They will destroy every institution until they are stopped. The end game for them is not finding a more just way to live together amid our common human brokenness. It's about identifying and purging the body politic of the transgressors. And if we don't stop it, it'll all be torn down. And we won't know where we've been, and we won't know where to go. We'll be lost and aimless. We'll be without identity and purpose, and we'll be anxious. And I'd argue that we see that all over the place today in our culture. Progressives, they whine and complain. A couple people in charge cave, and that's it. No one speaks up. We do. You do. I'm glad you're here. True story. Mike Slater. Spread the word. We'll see you tomorrow.